Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod, and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello, and welcome to what I believe is episode 128 of the Monday Night Review. I could be wrong. I hope you're all well. I always say that, but I do. It's a genuine hope for you. I've had a couple of emails this week to say how much you love the podcast, so I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoy it. I have got a case of matricide for you today. It's thankfully not very common at all, but not completely unheard of. And we're going to Ireland. Now, the main victim in this case is called Lavinia, Vena, Vera, depending on where you look. There's a lot of conflicting information. I'm going to call her Vena because that's the one that appears most often. But she doesn't fare very well or very long in this story. So we're going to 1936 in Dublin. Well, near Dublin, not in Dublin, near Dublin. And the story begins on the 18th of February 1936, when a newspaper delivery man discovers an abandoned car while on his route by Shankill. It was strangely parked facing the sea with one door partially open. So it looks abandoned suddenly. So that's why he's having an investigate. Upon closer inspection, he sees bloodstains on the seat and a blood-stained towel, and he's concerned. There's no one around, so he immediately notifies the police, and they come out and they have a look, and the car is identified as belonging to Mrs. Lavinia Ball, a 53-year-old woman from Booterstown, about 15 kilometres away. Vena is the estranged wife of a Dublin specialist from whom she'd been separated for several years. They had two sons, the younger of whom was 19-year-old Edward, who lived with his mother. He had studied in England and he had just moved back to live with his mother. She was a lady of independent means. So she had about £12,000 at the time in securities and things. So she had this income coming in. And she and her son fight a fair bit. Now, police go to their home on 23 St Helens Road in Booterstown. No one's home. So they start searching for Vera. They suspect foul play. There's a lot of blood. It's by the sea. It's not looking good. And this search would include aeroplane, looking for the body, boats eventually. And meanwhile, police stay watching the home. And eventually Edward Ball returns home, and the police knock on the door and explain that they found this car. Where's his mother? And he says he hasn't seen her since the previous evening. And they go in to search the house. When they search the house, they find bloody clothing and a large blood stain on his mother's bedroom floor. This obviously hasn't been tidied up or cleared up. It's worth noting. The police decide this is sinister enough for them to take Edward in, and Edward is arrested and taken to Bridewell police station. And he says, my mother was depressed. She killed herself with a razor in her bedroom, and that's where all the blood's come from. And to save her from, the shame of suicide and the religious connotations that would have, I wrapped her up and took her and disposed of her body. And this is a story that he would stick to. Meanwhile, once he's been taken in, the police are doing a deeper search of the house. Edward's father, the estranged husband of Vena, has been notified, and they find a bloody hatchet in one of the outbuildings. So they still have found no body. They've got the car, they've got blood stains. It's also really worth noting that, obviously now there's a definite way to tell if someone has done something with a razor versus a hatchet and all of that. There's not as much crime scene analysis and all of that going on. So they're still trying to find Vena's body. They believe that what he's done is he's driven her in the car, dragged her and thrown her into the sea. So they concentrate on the sea. They get boats to look. And without wanting to be too graphic, they assume that at some point her body will rise to the surface and will wash up. But it doesn't. They do find a hairpin with some human hair and blood and some blood stains along the lane leading to the sea. And that, so they think, right, she's in the car. He's dragged her along this path and thrown her in the water. I'm not sure how much he says, because obviously he says he disposed of her to prevent the suicide association, with her name. But they never find her body, and they believe that the blood stain, the rug is missing from her bedroom. There's a big blood stain on the floor of the carpet, so they believe that perhaps she was rolled up in this rug. They don't know if it was properly weighted down, but if she was rolled up in a rug and it was sort of securely tied, it could be that she had sunk and that was it. So they are satisfied, though, that they have as much information as they need to understand how she died, that she is dead, and that her son Edward is responsible for her death. It is that there is no other suspect. She didn't, I think she was not necessarily amicable with her ex-husband, but they had very separate lives. As I said, she was independently wealthy. She didn't have to worry about money. I don't think she was in a situation where he was sort of stopping her from living the life she wanted, through that kind of separation. I don't know what her life must have been like as a separated woman in Ireland in the 1930s. But there really is no one else who can be deemed responsible. And so they've got their man. Now, Edward's defense in court is pretty clever. He says his mother committed suicide by slitting her own throat with a razor blade. And to protect her public image, he's disposed of the body. And because of this defense, it means that any evidence, the bloodstains in the house, the bloodstains on his clothes, the location of his mother's car, a witness comes forward who says that they gave him a lift from near where the car was found that night. And all of this, his version of events, it all fits with this story. Had he gone into his trial saying, I had nothing to do with it, I don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 and then they find the bloodstains in the house, then they find a man who says, yeah, I gave this guy a lift on that night, so putting him in the area where the car was found, then it would say, well, you must be guilty because you're lying. Whereas they can't prove that he's not lying, really. And he sticks to his story. The main evidence against him is that he and his mother were constantly rowing, which people were able to confirm, although that is perhaps not unusual. And a hatchet is found in the garden shed with Vena's bloodstains on it, or with bloodstains on it. I don't think we can confirm that it was Vena's. So it's a very difficult case, really, for the jury to decide. On the 23rd of May, at the end of a 6-day trial, Edward Ball is found guilty of Lavinia Ball's murder, but insane, and is sentenced to be detained indefinitely. He's actually spends 14 years at the Central Criminal Lunatic Asylum in Dundrum in Dublin. And interestingly, had he pleaded guilty, or had he been found guilty, he would have not inherited any of his mother's money. But because he was found guilty but insane, he inherited his mother's money from her will. I don't know what the split was with his brother or anything like that, but very interesting to note, because I don't know. I think part of the reason that they found him mentally unstable was perhaps it was just such a horrifying thought that somebody could take a hatchet to their own mother, that for a lot of people that must mean some form of mental break. So he goes to what was called the Central Criminal Lunatic Asylum, which was probably unpleasant. He has visitors while he's there, and after 14 years he's released, and he has his mother's money. So he's 19 when he's arrested, so let's say he's 20 when he starts his sentence. So by the time he's 35, he is a free man of some means, and he travels to, he's released in 1950. He goes to Paris and admitted his guilt, frankly and openly and in detail, to his friend Richard Cobb, who he had, I believe, been to school or university with. And Richard Cobb would go on to write a book about it called A Classical Education. And in Cobb's opinion, on that fatal day in 1936, Ball had, quote, acted in a sudden, uncontrollable rage and under pretty severe provocation. I haven't read the book. So he obviously believes that Vena just pushed and pushed and pushed. I don't know how sudden and uncontrollable it must be to go outside, go to the shed, get a hatchet, come back and attack your mother. That, to me, I'd be like, get outside and just keep walking. You know, don't go back. If you're feeling that angry, I would suggest. So I'm sure it wasn't necessarily premeditated, but there is a certain, it wasn't sort of, I picked up a poker that was next to my hand and whacked her suddenly and didn't really know what I'd done. But obviously he believed that she was provoked. Edward Ball later widely travelled on the continent, and some believe he was employed by the Automobile Association in London for some time. And he dies, I believe, in the 1980s, late 1980s. So obviously in the trial, it was heard how he rowed with his mother a lot, and they obviously had a difficult relationship. It's interesting that when he finished university or his education, he returned to Ireland to live with her. He chose not to live with his father. Whether that was an option, I don't know. But if they were rowing as much as the story would have them, it seems an odd choice to opt to go back to live with her. We don't know. Maybe she was very controlling. Some believe that Vena had the onset of dementia, and this put a massive strain on their relationship. And obviously, again, 1930s, we didn't have the knowledge of dementia that we do now. And, you know, it's a horrifying disease now. But in the 1930s, for a 19-year-old boy to live with, that must have been very difficult. But we have, there's no proof. And Vena has never been found. So we don't know. So it's an interesting one. Was it a son driven to the brink by an illness in his mother? Was it a man driven to the brink who suffered a mental break? Was it a heat of the moment argument that just got very out of hand? We don't know, but he did his 14 years and then travelled a lot and didn't seem to, as far as we know, do anything wrong again. He, as I say, travelled, he worked, he wasn't flagged up as being a weirdo later in life. And that is the story of the murder of Lavinia Ball by her son Edward Ball. As a mother of 3 sons, I'm glad it's a rarity. And I think that perhaps that really went in his favour, because I don't think it would now. But I think probably people just thought, how can you possibly... I mean, to me, I was literally thinking, well, come on, the 1930s is 50 years ago, but it's not. It's like 50 years ago, was things that much different? Nearly 100 years ago, yes. So, I think people probably, that did go in his favour. You must be suffering from something to do that to your mother. And poor Vena, never found. She might have been an old battle axe, but I don't think that really means you deserve getting whacked in the head. I love to hear from you. Do email me, themondaynighreview@gmail.com. I love your suggestions, your recommendations. And I heard from lovely Charlie this week, and she's too freaked out to listen to true crime stuff. She loves the history stuff. I love the true crime stuff, but I'm always aware that I don't want to make it too true crimey. And I really like focusing on the stories that perhaps you haven't heard of, although, of course, at some point I will get to Ted Bundy and that kind of thing. I do try and focus on perhaps lesser well-known ones. And you can find me on social media at the Monday Night Review. Thanks to everyone who is a patron. You can sign up for free, try a week for free and see how you go to get the extra episodes. I've already forgotten what this week's extra episode was. I've got a cracker for next week, thanks to my husband this morning on the way to the station. Came up with a real corker that I hadn't heard of before. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.